of y'all don't think about peace in some big grand way. But, with all that I know about religions, and even though I'm not a religious person, I think a lot can be said about forgiveness leading to peace. And I'm not talking about just internal peace, I'm talking about peace in the world. I was listening to a friend of mine talk today about the, really, it was about the vengeance that he holds. He doesn't talk like that, but he has a lot of vengeance. Um, he's probably, he tells me this stuff, so, I know what's internally going on, what he's saying, but I don't really hear that from everybody else, but you can tell there's a lot of vengeful people out there. And I think it leads to just, a lot of terrible, unpeaceful things. There's a lot of assholes out there. There's people that will cut you down the moment they feel like they can get away with it. I see it in kids. Their immature mind. They're always thinking about how they can get away with something. And I think it stems from vengeance and this lack of forgiveness. You know, the Christian idea of forgiveness is, the idea is right, but I'm not so sure that, Christians themselves, or anybody that would hear the idea, really understand like how deep of a concept we really need to be living that thoughtful idea of forgiving people. You know, everybody thinks, oh yeah, if I forgive them, or we should forgive, and it'll, make you feel better about yourself. And I think a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but people, I think, understand, at least Christians, and I'm not a Christian. I grew up a Christian. I know a lot about Christianity. I was a devout Catholic, but I'm not anymore. And I think that's rooted in a lot of um, deep thought about life and the universe in general. But I'm not here to really say that, that's right in general. But there are definitely ideas that I have that I think are right. And the concept of forgiveness leading to peace is fruitful. Think about it. If you can forgive somebody, let me just go back to my friend that was telling me, he experienced and witnessed terrible, awful, awful things, such as you know, uh, he once saw his police department in his town bust in his door and falsely accuse his mom of some terrible shit. I forget exactly what it was, but you know, they came in and busted the door down and had her on the ground and, from what I recall, nearly killed her. And and he also has seen his you know his mom's boyfriend try to snap her neck in a fit of rage. And I think and he's told me about um, his stepdad. Much when he was much younger, before he was even a teenager. Uh, you know, beating him, throwing trash on him, shit like that, and those are awful, awful, fucking awful things. But he lives with this idea every day. I don't know if it comes up all the time, but it's been explained enough that I understand that he is in it. He thinks about that shit all the time. Um, but he told me today that he would look forward to the day where if he ever found this man, I don't even think he knows who he is or whatever, but if he had the opportunity, he'd fucking kill him. And he wouldn't think twice about it. And he would, and I talked about, he's not a bad person. I'm not saying that at all. Um, but he talked about, because I asked, what do you think about, basically the consequences, how you would feel. Um, and he literally said, if on one hand I get to feel peace, and letting it go, he would not prefer that relative to the immense consequences of uh, going to prison, basically. If he, got caught doing that, which I'm sure he probably wouldn't even hide it. It's not like he would be thinking about, ways to get away with it. But he felt like the consequences of that were preferable because he would enact his vengeance. He wants that. And I think a lot of people are that way, and it may not be so extreme, but I see all this shit all the time with, you know, go straight to the top. We have a president right now that displays that all the time, talking about, he wants to, he has this thing with Obama or Biden or liberals in general, and he will knock them down any chance he gets. He'll enact laws to prevent their ideas, uh, enacts laws to retroactively, you know, imprison his enemies. That's right from the top, from the president. And there's so many other people in this world that are always thinking about how to get their enemies. It's like how do we expect to make any progress at all if that just continues the cycle over and over and over? It just perpetuates, it gets worse, it grows. We get into wars because people are vengeful. Not all the time. That's not the only reason for war, but I mean, I think it's a deep rooted thing. Imagine if, let's just start with one person. Just completely, you know, it takes a lot. It's not easy. But just imagine that, you know, if you have an intentional, it doesn't have to be some kind of big thing, but intentional, meditative kind of posture that you take maybe once a day of releasing, all the hate, the vengefulness, all the just basically pushing away any of that from your system for just even a brief moment of meditation, prayer, would call it whatever you want. But releasing yourself of that need and ultimately forgiving, whatever it is that you have been holding on to. What happens when you do that? You get rid of that vengeance. And, it might take a lot of effort. Maybe one meditation session is not enough. I know people that have hung on for shit, and they even say that they've, forgiven them. But it's not really gone. But in order to really facilitate that, I think you've got to be in an intentional state of wanting to release that. You can't just say, "Oh yeah, I forgive them." What does that mean? Because maybe even 6 months down the road, you're talking to your husband or whatever, and it comes right back up. And but if you truly have been able to intentionally release yourself of that vengeance and forgive someone for what they did, imagine how much more peaceful you as an individual will be in life. Just the practical matter of you're not even thinking about that anymore. You're thinking about more productive things. You're thinking about how to get on in life instead of hanging on to that one, person that wronged you. Because what does it solve to hang on to that? Especially when you're probably not even going to be able to react in any practical manner. You know? Think about all those things that you hold in that you're vengeful about. All that bullshit. It's not like you're going to meet that person on the street necessarily. I mean, maybe you will. I'm sure that's very likely in a lot of scenarios. But, typically, I don't think, it's not necessarily going to be, well, you're meeting them on the street and then you're going to even take action. No, you're ruminating about that in your head. That is taking up space in your head. truly forgive somebody, it's not there anymore. Can you really say that you forgive somebody if you are still thinking about it? Then imagine taking that one idea of an individual forgiving somebody, or multiple people, or whatever, uh, multiple people as in forgiving multiple people. Um, yeah, but then expand that to multiple people, as in that multiple people are forgiving their own transgressors. Then you have many more people just living life, not thinking about all that venge, all that stuff. It's just not going anywhere. Productivity increases, uh, honesty probably tend to increase. The aggressive feelings that ruminate, or that is ruminate the right word? I don't know, but that just spew from you. That aggressiveness because you're because you've got that vengeful attitude. Um, you see couples fighting all the time. You see wars breaking out. But imagine if all of us did that. Forgave internally the people that transgressed against us. Can you imagine how much more peaceful we would all be? How much the world would be more peaceful? I feel like, right now we've got a country, I'll say it, Israel is enacting revenge. They don't say it exactly that way, but it's pretty damn close. It's not a secret, really. And the U.S. joins in on that. We may not have a dog in that fight, but we participate, and we once we join the fight, and this is just human behavior, we're going to be just as vengeful as the originators of the vengefulness. We're going to join our tribe and beat the shit out of whoever it is that the other person's trying to beat the shit out of. Why not? Imagine if Israel, the founders of Judaism, essentially, in the Old Testament, they're not tied to the New Testament, which does speak about forgiveness. But imagine if they weren't as vengeful. Imagine if they actually forgave. Their neighbors to the north, fucking Iran. And then also imagine you kind of have to, because you don't have to imagine that the other person has to forgive. It certainly helps, but even if they don't, you certainly can. Israel can. And on the other foot, Iran can, for the things that Israel's done to them. It's possible. People always say that, oh well, we gotta defend ourselves, and eye for an eye. Really? Do we? Do we have to? I mean, imagine what would happen if we stopped pushing back so much. Just said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm not saying it would be an easy go, but I think that defending yourself is one thing, but going after another person, with that vengeful attitude, or another country, that's where these battles are perpetuated, and it comes from the deep-rooted seed vengefulness, the lack of forgiveness. It's not just a personal idea. It's an idea that can be a global phenomenon. Leaders, uh, people that make decisions on battles in the political, geopolitical grand scheme of things. If people actually forgave others in their mind, we would actually make progress to peace. But right now we're stuck. There are too many vengeful people that don't even think about the idea of forgiveness. And I think forgiveness is the root of peace. And I don't think that you have to be a Christian to believe that, because I'm not a Christian. But the idea, though, is I think it fixes the evil in a lot of ways. Not every way, but it fixes a lot of those problems if we would just think about our own peace, and release that hate and vengefulness, and this need to show face. Why? Where does it get us? It gets us death, destruction, anger. I mean, some of the worst things in the